Imagine standing in the blistering 100-degree heat of the ancient Persian desert over 2,000 years ago. There are no refrigerators, there is no electricity. The very concept of a freezer is centuries away from being invented. A servant approaches you holding a bowl of crushed ice, dripping with sweet fruit syrup, perfectly frozen. Before modern technology, enjoying a frozen dessert wasn't just a culinary treat. It was a logistical miracle. It required harvesting winter snow, dragging it across continents, and burying it in deep underground caverns, just to survive the summer. For centuries, freezing your food was a flex of absolute imperial power. So how did a dessert that once required the wealth of an emperor become something you can buy for $2 from a truck playing a jingle in your neighborhood? Welcome to Food Lore. Today, we are unpacking the freezing, fascinating, and highly secretive history of ice cream. But before we go any further, here's something I want to know. What is your all-time favorite ice cream flavor? Are you a traditional vanilla purist, a chocolate lover, or something completely out of the box? Drop your answer in the comments. We'll come back to the story. To understand ice cream, we first have to understand the absolute impossibility of its main ingredient, ice. In the ancient world, ice was a phantom. It appeared in the winter and vanished in the spring. If you wanted ice in July, you had to fight nature. Around 400 BC, the Persians figured out how to do exactly that. They built massive, conical structures called yakhchals. These were ancient, evaporative coolers made of a special mortar containing sand, clay, egg whites, and goat hair, which made them completely insulated and water-resistant. Inside these deep pits, they stored ice brought down from the mountains during the winter. By summer, the ice was still there. They would take this ice, crush it, and mix it with grape juice, rose water, and saffron to create a dish called sharbat, the linguistic ancestor of the word sherbet. Thousands of miles away in China, during the Tang dynasty, emperors were doing something similar, but they took a crucial step closer to what we know today. They mixed buffalo milk, flour, and camphor, a highly aromatic compound extracted from evergreen trees, and packed the mixture into metal tubes, which were then lowered into ice pools until they froze. Alexander the Great famously loved snow flavored with honey and nectar. The Roman Emperor Nero supposedly sent fleets of runners into the mountains to relay fresh snow back to Rome before it could melt, just so he could eat it with fruit and nuts. But there was a fundamental problem with all of these ancient treats. None of them were actually ice cream. They were iced drinks, slushes, snow cones. Because as it turns out, you cannot make ice cream just by putting milk into a bucket of ice. Here is where the story of ice cream takes a hard pivot from agriculture into chemistry. If you take a bowl of cream and submerge it in a bucket of ice, it will just get cold. It will never freeze. Milk and cream contain sugars and fats, which lower their freezing point below that of pure water. Ice, resting at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius, simply isn't cold enough to freeze milk. To bridge the gap from cold milk to ice cream, humanity needed a scientific breakthrough. That breakthrough came via a chemical phenomenon known as endothermic freezing. And it all revolved around one unexpected ingredient, salt. Sometime between the 13th and 16th centuries, likely spreading from Asia to the Middle East, and eventually into Europe, people realized that if you add salt to ice, it forces the ice to melt, but paradoxically, it drastically lowers the temperature of the resulting icy slush. A mixture of ice and salt can drop well below freezing, reaching close to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Suddenly, the ice bath was cold enough to freeze the cream inside the bowl. By the 1500s and 1600s, this secret had reached Italy. The Italian elite became obsessed with this magical transformation. A man named Antonio Latini, working for a Spanish viceroy in Naples, wrote down some of the very first recorded recipes for milk-based sorbets in the 17th century. Ice cream had officially been born, but knowing how to make it didn't mean just anyone could eat it. Imagine the grocery list for making ice cream in the year 1700. First, you needed cream, which meant you needed cows and a dairy. Second, you needed sugar, which at the time was a highly expensive, imported spice tied to the brutal colonial plantation system. Third, you needed ice, which meant you needed to own an expensive ice house on your estate. Fourth, you needed salt, heavily taxed and expensive in its own right. And finally, you needed cheap, grueling human labor, because to make ice cream smooth, you couldn't just let it sit in the salted ice bath. If it froze perfectly still, it would turn into a solid, crunchy block of milk ice. To get a creamy texture, the mixture had to be constantly beaten, scraped, and churned by hand for hours as it froze, breaking up the ice crystals into microscopic pieces. Because of this intense cost and labor, ice cream was the ultimate status symbol. When European aristocrats served ice cream at a dinner party, they weren't just feeding their guests a sweet dessert. They were showing off. They were effectively saying, "I am so wealthy, I have conquered the seasons. I can afford to serve you winter in the middle of summer." When the recipe crossed the Atlantic to the American colonies, the obsession continued among the wealthy elite. George Washington loved ice cream so much that in the summer of 1790, he spent $200 on it, which, adjusted for inflation, is roughly equivalent to spending $5,000 on ice cream in a single summer. Thomas Jefferson meticulously wrote down an 18-step recipe for vanilla ice cream after returning from France. Ice cream was a luxury for presidents and kings, but what happened next would completely rip ice cream out of the hands of the elite. The year is 1843. A woman named Nancy Johnson, living in Philadelphia, is frustrated. She loves ice cream, but the pot freezer method, where you manually scrape the freezing cream off the sides of a pewter pot with a spoon, is exhausting, messy, and inconsistent. So, Johnson did what any great inventor does. She engineered a solution. She designed a wooden bucket to hold the ice and salt. Inside that, she placed a tall metal cylinder to hold the cream. But her stroke of absolute genius was the dasher, a paddle inserted into the cream, connected to a hand crank on the lid. Instead of scraping the sides manually, you just turned the crank. The dasher scraped the freezing cream off the metal walls perfectly and folded it back into the center, creating the smoothest, creamiest texture the world had ever seen, in a fraction of the time. She filed a patent for the artificial freezer in 1843. Because she lacked the funds to manufacture it herself, she sold the rights to her patent for a mere $200. The buyer immediately mass-produced it, and within a few years, hand-crank ice cream makers were popping up in middle-class kitchens everywhere. The labor problem was solved. But ice cream was still a localized, homemade treat. It wasn't an industry yet. For that, we have to thank a dairy farmer who made a massive miscalculation. In 1851, a milk dealer named Jacob Fussell was running a successful dairy business in Baltimore, Maryland. But Fussell had a recurring problem. The demand for milk was highly unpredictable. Sometimes he sold out. Other times, he was left with gallons of heavy cream that was about to go sour. Throwing it away was costing him money. He needed a way to preserve the cream. He realized that if he turned his surplus cream into ice cream and froze it, it wouldn't spoil. So Fussell built a large-scale ice cream manufacturing facility. Because he was buying cream in massive bulk, his production costs plummeted. He could sell his factory-made ice cream for less than half the price of the local confectioners. The public went wild. Fussell opened factories in Washington, D.C., Boston, and New York. Almost overnight, ice cream transformed from an artisan boutique luxury into a mass-manufactured, cheap commodity. Jacob Fussell accidentally became the father of the wholesale ice cream industry. By the late 19th century, ice cream was everywhere. You could buy a scoop from street vendors in New York City for a single penny, served in a small glass called a penny lick. You would lick the ice cream out of the glass, hand it back to the vendor, and they would give it to the next customer, a practice that was eventually banned for obvious sanitary reasons. But the explosion of ice cream led to a cultural clash, and it birthed one of the most famous desserts in American history. By the late 1800s, the ice cream soda had become an absolute sensation. Soda fountains were the cultural hangouts of the era. But religious leaders and conservative lawmakers were not happy about this. They felt that soda fountains were becoming rowdy, secular gathering places that distracted people from the sanctity of the Sabbath. Several towns across America enacted blue laws, which strictly prohibited the sale of soda water on Sundays. If you couldn't sell soda water, you couldn't sell ice cream sodas. Fountain owners were losing their most profitable day of the week. But businessmen are nothing if not creative. Legend has it that an ingenious fountain owner decided to cheat the system. If the law explicitly banned soda water on Sundays, he would just leave it out. He took a few scoops of ice cream, covered it with the sweet-flavored syrup usually meant for the soda, and topped it with a cherry. He called it an ice cream served on Sunday. Eventually, the spelling was changed to Sundae, so it wouldn't offend religious sensibilities by using the holy day's name. The ice cream sundae was born not out of culinary inspiration, but as a legal loophole. As the 20th century dawned, ice cream faced one lingering problem: packaging. Selling ice cream meant serving it in glass dishes or paper plates, which required washing or created trash. In 1904, the World's Fair was held in St. Louis, Missouri. It was a massive, chaotic, sweltering summer event attended by millions. According to culinary legend, an ice cream vendor at the fair was selling so much ice cream that he ran completely out of paper dishes. He was losing money by the minute. In the booth next to him was a Syrian immigrant named Ernest Hamwi, who was selling zalabia, a crisp, waffle-like pastry cooked on a hot press. Seeing his neighbors panic, Hamwi allegedly took one of his hot waffles, rolled it into a cone shape, and let it cool. It hardened perfectly. He handed the cone to the ice cream vendor, who dropped a scoop of ice cream on top. While historians debate whether this exact moment was truly the first time someone put ice cream in a cone, the 1904 World's Fair absolutely popularized it. It was an engineering marvel, a container you could hold in one hand, walk around with, and then eat, leaving zero waste behind. The ice cream cone became a global phenomenon, but the final evolution of ice cream relied on something entirely invisible: mechanical refrigeration. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, the development of continuous electrical freezers and refrigerated transport completely severed ice cream from its reliance on winter snow and harvested ice. Now, ice cream could be made by the ton, shipped across the country in refrigerated rail cars, and kept rock solid in the newly invented home freezer. During World War II, the U.S. military recognized ice cream as such a vital morale booster that they built floating ice cream factories on barges in the Pacific just to serve soldiers on the front lines. Post-war America saw the rise of the supermarket, leading to the cardboard half-gallon tubs we know today. Scientists learned how to pump extra air, called overrun, into the ice cream during the freezing process, making it lighter, fluffier, and cheaper to produce. Today, ice cream is a multi-billion-dollar global industry. We have liquid nitrogen freezing, dairy-free alternatives, and flavors ranging from classic vanilla to soy sauce and garlic. Think about how far this strange dessert has come. It started as an impossible luxury, snow carried down from a mountain by runners, reserved only for emperors and kings. It relied on a freak chemical reaction between salt and ice. It was liberated by a frustrated woman with a hand crank, industrialized by a milkman trying to save his surplus, and molded into a cone by desperate vendors at a World's Fair. The next time you grab a pint from the freezer aisle, remember that you are holding what used to be a miracle. You are eating the culinary equivalent of conquering the seasons. If you enjoy discovering the strange stories hiding behind the foods we eat every day, subscribe to Food Lore, because there's always another ordinary food with an extraordinary history. And if you think popcorn is just the snack you grab at the movies, Wait until you discover how far back its story actually goes. We're talking about ancient tombs, explosive scientific discoveries, a snack that literally saved the movie theater industry from total collapse. How did an ancient seed become the ultimate modern entertainment food? That's the story we're uncovering next, right here on Food Lore. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.